Okay, it's winter time. It's time to get my archery gear fixed up. So, got all these wooden arrows there that, well, they got to be 10, 15, 20 years old now. A lot of the fletchings are falling off. A lot of them had actually been through a flood, went underwater, and so I've got fletchings coming off. I've got knocks and arrowheads coming off. So I've got plenty to do. I'm going to traditionally fletch these arrows. Most of the wooden arrows, I'm going to try and do them all the same. I'm going to keep about a dozen hunting arrows in wood, and the rest I want to fletch them up all the same. I'm leaning towards a 2-vane fletch. So traditional fletching comes in many forms, I guess. When I'm talking about traditional fletching, I'm not really just saying wooden arrows, feather vanes. So the difference now between an older vane is that they were made from real feathers, and the new stuff is made from like rubber vanes and or plastic. And the shaft materials, pretty much wood, traditional, and then you got into the aluminium. These are those Eastern aluminium arrows, which I really like. I actually prefer them to the newer carbon fiber ones, but I don't consider that the shaft or the fletching type dictates whether it's traditional or not. So I can traditionally fletch a carbon fiber shaft just as easy as I can traditionally fletch a wooden shaft. So what differentiates one from the other? I need a small bow just to show you this. So traditional, make sure you can see all that. Yeah. Traditional fletching, you either get 3-vane. Alright. Now with the 3-vane fletching, you're going to have what you call it, a knocking vane or a knocking feather. I think you can see that. So you'll have 2 that are one colour and another that's an odd colour. Alright. And that is so that when you knock the arrow onto the bowstring, this is just a kid's bow obviously, you keep that knocking feather on the outside, and that's how you can tell you've got everything aligned correctly. So if you've got everything aligned correctly, you get less as you draw it back and then you let it go, and the feathers run across the rest. And actually, technically, if you get a perfectly tuned arrow, you should have very little very little feather touching on the rest, because of what they call the archer's parallax, which is where you release the bow and the actual arrow bends to the point where it actually goes around the bow and the rest. But anyway, it is good to be able to try and avoid as much contact with the feathers on that rest as it flies across there. So a traditional one, the knocking vane is on the outside like that. But recently I purchased my lady a recurve bow, and we were going to go and do a bit of traditional archery, just a bit of target practice. And the arrows that came, these are carbon fibre, and you'll see it's got two fletches the same colour and one fletch which is a different colour. The problem is that the knock does not align with the string when the knocking fletch is on the outside, which is where it should. In fact, it actually aligns when the knocking fletch is in the upright position, or the down position, I guess, as well. But it definitely does not align as in traditional archery. You can see that. So now my first reflex was to take this back to the local gun and archery store and say, hey Dopey, you put the feathers on wrong. But after a little bit of research, I realized that with the modern bows, with all their peep sights and all their gear, they're actually using this knocking feather kind of like as a sight. So they're using that as part of the sighting arrangement, and that's why it's meant to sit in the upright position. Now, I'm not particularly interested in modern bows, compounds, and all the sighting and gadgets that comes with them. I've got more than enough fun with traditional style stuff. So I want to fletch up some traditional arrows. In fact, I also want to, so I bought these arrows, these carbon fibre ones, and I want to refletch those so that I can use them on traditional gear, recurve bows. So that brings me to types of traditional fletching, and the jig that I'm going to use to do my fletching. So of the traditional fletching, it seems like 3 fletch arrows were or are the most common. Not that I can't hardly buy a traditionally fletched arrow anymore. They're all fletched for compound bows. But it seems like 3 fletch was the most common one, and that's because it gives a good, it stabilizes quickly. So you notice the fletching has a bit of a twist to it. That's called its helical twist rate or something or other. So as this arrow releases, it actually starts to spin with the force of the air, and like a bullet, that actually helps to stabilize it through the air. And the quicker it can stabilize, the better it is for accuracy. But too many fletches will actually slow down the arrow before, I'm just making sure you can still see that, will actually slow down the arrow a lot more. So you lose a lot of arrow speed quicker with more fletches. So that's the 3 most common with the knocking. Another one that was very popular was a 4 fletch, and once again, this stabilized the arrow very quickly and very efficiently, causing it to spin and stabilize. But the 4 fletches caused more drag, more resistance, and so the arrow slowed down quicker. Which isn't a problem in some cases, and I'm in 2 minds actually. So I'm going to all these wooden arrows I'm going to refletch, and I'm either going to do it in 2 vane fletching, which is just 2 feathers, 2 vanes, or I'm going to do it in the 4. And the reason I prefer that, I prefer the 2 or the 4, over the 3 is because there's no knocking feather with either the 2 or the 4. So effectively you can pull one of these arrows out, you can set it in your string, and you can shoot it without actually having to look and see that you've got the correct knocking orientation. No matter how you put, if you can put that knock onto the string, it's in the right spot, and you'll get very little. What I've just, I did a bit of checking out, and between the 2 and the 4, 2 gives much less resistance on the arrow rest or on the handle of the bow. So I'm leaning towards 2 if I can get good stability. I don't shoot real long distances. If I can get pretty good stability with a 2 vane fletch, I'm going to go with the 2 vane. It doesn't slow the arrow down as much, and another thing between the 2 and the 4, I actually think the more feathers you have, especially if they're larger feathers, they make a lot more noise, and that's kind of important if you're hunting, because you can actually hear an arrow coming towards you. And many deer and rabbits can actually, they can hear the bowstring go twang, and then they can hear this arrow coming towards them, and they can give them enough warning to jump out of the road there that quick. Alright, and so what I'm going to be using to do this fletching, I'm going to do, I'm not interested in the 3 vane, I've got plenty of 3 vane stuff, and I'm going to keep, probably a dozen 3 vanes for hunting arrows, but the rest I'm going to do 6 with the 2 vane, 6 with the 4 vane, and I'm going to do a bit of testing and see how much I like the 2 vane. If the 2 vane works effectively enough for me, I'm going to do everything in 2 vane and call it a day. So this jig is called I'm not sure if you can see that on the bottom. It's called a Jojan. Jojan? Yeah, Jojan. Jig for fletching arrows, fletching jig, and I've actually owned one like this for 30 years now. It's one of the first things I got. I've owned other ones like these single plasticky ones, but I much prefer this multi-arrow rig. Takes a bit of setting up. These are the arrangements for putting the fletches in. I've got a little mark there where I want to put the bottom of the fletch. Mark there where I want to put the bottom of the fletch. And you just line it up. Okay. Then you apply the glue across there, and then you just fit it into the to those slots there, and it just holds it there until the glue has dried. So, and it makes a nice stable arrangement for putting the feathers on. Rather than trying to hold them there with your hands or tying them in with a bit of string, as I do with my my Indian style arrows. So that's what those are for. Now this Jojan rig takes a bit of setting up. You've got an adjustment on the bottom, and you've got an adjustment on the top. And the best thing I can tell you about that is that so this is a right hand helical clamp. You can actually, it's a long, I don't know when the last time they actually made these. I don't know if they're made anymore, or if you can get any of the parts or whatever. But I think at one point you could get a straight helical, and you can get a left hand helical. So you can get different types of those. And so this one is a right hand. So I'll pull these out for a second. So with the top arrangement, can see right there, you've got an L, an S and an R. So I've got it set to the R, which is for right hand helical, and I've actually had to adjust it over another millimetre, fraction of an inch over, just to get everything aligned correctly. And then you have your bottom ones, and once again it's just a matter of undoing those wing nuts and just adjusting it to where you need to. And all I can really tell you about the adjustment is when these fletches are put on, they need to remain, even though they're going to basically twist around the arrow shaft, they need to remain in the middle of the arrow shaft. And if you get, now this one here is a good example of what happened wrong. See this bottom one? That bottom fletch is kicked out, and that's because when this one was fletched, the bottom rail wasn't aligned correctly, so it didn't get a good amount of glue on that area. So if the bottom is not aligning and sticking securely to the shaft, you need to adjust this bottom rail. If the top is not aligning, that top's pretty good, there's no problem with the top, but that bottom definitely did not align correctly. So yeah, you just need to adjust that, get it right, whether it's the top of the fletch or the bottom of the fletch, and once you've got it right, you shouldn't have to adjust it again. There is a bit of adjustment. If you want to, for whatever reason, you want to put a little bit more spin on it, you could do that. But when I'm dealing with these long fletches, there's not a lot I can do, because if I don't have it exactly in adjustment at the top or the bottom, it'll throw the fletch off at the top or the bottom, and it'll ruin the job. But you do have a little bit more with these small, shorter fletches. You've got a little bit more leeway to play around. So if I wanted to put a bit more twist on a small fletch, I could do that, and make it spin a bit quicker or stabilize faster. So yeah, anyway, that's what I'm going to do. Okay, I'm just going to do one 3-fletch arrow just to show you, or illustrate one of the things on this Joe-Gen arrow jig, and that is on these little pieces here. I'm not sure what they call them, but your knock, as it sits in the jig down there, knock's going to sit into that piece there like that. And then depending on whether you're doing 3-fletch, 4-fletch or 2-fletch, that's going to dictate which side of this is upright, because you've got this one here is the 3, so there's 1, 2, 3 little divots which lock into that spring-loaded ball bearing there, and this one, and you turn it around and you have 1, 2, 3, 4. So depending on whether you're doing 2, 3 or 4, you'll have to change this around. So this is that's the 3 side. Now the first feather I'm going to do, that's the 3 side. The first feather I'm going to do is going to be the knocking feather. So I want the divot that's directly opposed to that side. So that's going to be my knocking feather. So that's going to be the first one. That's locked in there now. I felt it snap into the little spring-loaded ball bearing, so that's in the right spot. So very first thing, before you do anything else, obviously you're going to need to fix your knock. A lot of my arrows have already got good knocks on them, and if the knock isn't, if the plastic hasn't degraded, and if it's still sticking firmly to the arrow shaft, I don't see any need to replace it. But this one here was loose, and I've already cleaned up. So how do you put those in? If you need to put in a chamfer, you can just use, they actually sell these just like a pencil sharpener, but made for arrows, and you can just put those in, turn them, tidy them up if you need to. If there's glue or whatever else on it, old stuff, you need to sort of clean that off, but that one's ready to go. And I will say, when it comes to the archery gear, that this actual fletch tight, actually this might be called something different, but good glue made for the job is very important. Some of the stuff I had a while ago, it was cyanacrylic acetate or whatever. That's what it said on the container, and which is basically super glue, but it was thicker, and it definitely worked much better than actual super glue. But in a pinch, you can use super glue. And so I'll let that one dry, and then I'll get to getting this 3 fletch done. So got the fletch set into the clamp. I've got the mark where I wanted the bottom of the fletch. There's no reason. I'm actually aiming for a little bit, hoping with these new fletching that I'm going to do, I'm hoping to get that the bottom of the fletch just a little bit higher. So that's why I've done that mark there. Good, nice little, I like a nice thick bead of we'll call this fletch tight or fletching glue. And there's nothing to say. Now, this being feather, that being wood, I could also use hide glue and get a very good adhesion as well. It just takes a lot longer to dry. And then this piece here is going to fit into that slot, and the ring will fit into the top. And I'm just going to make sure that the whole of the fletch contacts the shaft, because sometimes it'll stick up a little bit. That seems to be pretty good right now. And once I get that set down, just hold it there, let it dry, and once it's dry, I'll pull off the clamp, I'll turn it around, and I'll put on the next fletch. Okay, so actually let that dry overnight. You don't normally have to give this glue that long to dry. So you just release the clamp, pull it off, and it should be done. It's a good idea to inspect the fletch now, make sure you've got a good adhesion, but when I've got all 3 fletches on, I'll actually go and, yeah, see, that's not too bad. It's up a little bit on this corner, so what I'll do, after I've got all 3 fletches done on a 3 fletch arrow, I'll go and put a little dab of glue right on the front of that. That helps because I can feel a little bit of a sharp edge there, so a little bit of glue over that will make a big difference. But I'll finish putting on the other fletches. So once again, I'm doing the 3 fletch arrow at the moment, only just to show you how it's done on this jig. Obviously, if I was doing a lot of arrows, I'd have this whole thing filled up, and I'd be doing 6 at a time, and makes it go very quickly. So I'm just going to turn it around. I felt the little ball click into that slot, and now it's locked into place for the second fletch. And I'm actually just making the that's the one. So same deal. Line it up with your mark up there. Thin, not super thin, but slot. Make sure the feather contacts evenly. And you can use these like if you turkey hunt or keep geese or whatever, goose hunt. Turkey and goose wing feathers are a good feather to use, and you can use this jig with 100% natural feathers as well. So I'll give that a few minutes to dry, and then I'll finish this off. Got this final fletch to finish off. Set the feather, fletch, whatever. Oh, forgot to turn it. Turn the arrow until the next notch, which is the final one. Might have heard that click in, so that's ready to go. So I don't know if you saw it in the video, but when I was putting that on, the actual arrow moved a little bit, so as well as making sure the clamp is secure, make sure the actual arrow hasn't shifted off its base down there. So. Alright, now I just gotta wait for that to dry, and that will be finished. So it should be dry enough. This is now the clamp is very slightly stuck to the arrow. So obviously I've got a bit of glue in the clamp there somewhere, so I just want to try and tease that off so I don't tear off the fletch just yet. And then once I've got that done, I'll give a little bit of a touch to this area here with the fletch glue. Looks a little bit ugly, but it'll stop the front part of the fletch tearing off and going through your thumb. So, and that's not too bad. These are actually second-hand fletches too. I pulled them off and I'm reusing them, so they're not quite as pretty as something else, but they're still in pretty good condition, so I saw no reason not to use them. Alright, the next thing need to do. I'm going to do the 2 fletch arrangements first. 2 fletch arrows. Now to do the 2 fletch arrows, you need to be using the 4 fletch side. So the one that's got the 4 holes on it, that's the first side that goes in. And then you have to make sure, and to do that quickly, I'm just going to use an arrow that I've already got done the way I want it to, and just double check. So when I put the clamp on, that's where it's going to go. Good. Another good one. Now see, that's on the 4 fletch setting, but it's the wrong half of the 4 fletch. So I'm going to turn that around until it's there. So I know that's going to be in the right spot. It's also in the wrong spot, so I'm going to turn that around. Good. And this one's in the wrong spot. Turn it around. That wasn't the right spot. Find it again. There we go. So I actually felt that lock in. So now the jig is all set up for 2 fletching. Once again, I'm rebuilding a lot of these arrows, refletching them, and I've cleaned up where the knock's going to go. Now you can either use another, basically a pencil sharpener to redo that. Or all I did with this one, I just touched it up on the grinder, just gently turned it around as I was grinding. And the other thing you're going to need to do is to get off all this old fletching material and glue. So quick ways to do that is with a pocket knife held at right angles and just scrape along there. That cleans it up pretty quick. And you may want to give it a quick run down with sandpaper as well. That'll get you a nice, clean shaft ready for fletching. And I half suspect, so I had a bit of trouble with the fletching. I didn't actually do most of these. I did have a bit of trouble with them, losing feathers and knocks and whatever, and I think it's because they didn't do a good job of cleaning them up to start with. So you've also, I'm not going to go into it there now, but you also need to make sure that you've got a good arrow shaft, that the arrow shaft is straight. And but I'll do a different one on straightening arrow shafts, different video. But anyway, that one there is ready to get a knock on it, and then I'll get those set up, and I'm ready to fletch in 2 fletch mode. Okay, so I got all the shafts in the jig. I've got the feathers put into the clamps. I'm ready to start gluing these and setting them down. I've also got just using this plastic arrow jig, BP or whatever the brand is. But anyway, it's just something I picked up somewhere. Not definitely prefer this to that one, but this is doing the straight fletches, so I'm doing a straight fletch on some kids' arrows as well. Alright, so try and do that in front of the camera. These fletches are all reused. Oh, here it is, my lady has interrupted my videoing again.
You need a light that says red or green.
of a note on fletches. If you can, there's something wrong with this one. For some reason it's not sitting down neatly on the arrow shaft. Oh, there you go, I think I got it. So the fletches that you buy, you know, cut up and all easy to use, have been kind of cut in half. So the feather has been cut, and it leaves a lot of pith, which isn't too big of a deal. I mean, they work fine. But the best fletches is if you can split them by hand. I'll do another video on making those type of fletches as soon as I can find some turkey or goose feather. So I'm checking every one as I put them down, making sure that the feather, the fletch, is evenly on the arrow shaft. And, you know, when you're trying to make a lot of arrows or prepare a lot of arrows, these multi-jigs make a huge difference. Because I'll do 6, then I'll just let them dry, you know, probably give them an hour or two to thoroughly dry, and then I'll come back and do the next feather, next fletch. Ready for the next one. Let it dry and finish it off. Okay, that should be dry enough. Just plenty. And so in order to do a 2 fletch arrow, I'm using the 4 fletch jig. So all I have to do with this one, I'm not going to turn that, all I'm going to do is lift out the nock of the arrow, turn it around and put it back in. And that'll put the arrow in the correct position for the second fletching. Ready to get that done up. Okay, so these all should be dry. Like I said, what I do, giving them inspection, if I see anywhere where the feather hasn't fully, the fletch hasn't fully got down onto the thing, I'll squeeze in a bit more glue there just to strengthen it up, but especially around this front section. And reason for that is that front section, if it hits the arrow rest or the side of the bow, that's where it's actually going to start pulling off first. So. Okay. should be it. And now it's time to get the 4 fletch shaft set up. Okay, I missed a little bit here. I didn't show you putting the feathers on. I've started the 4 fletch. That one didn't. I need to glue that down a bit better. Started the 4 fletch. It's all the same. You see me, put glue on the feather on the fletch multiple times before. You don't need to see that anymore. Anything I'm going to say about the 4 fletch as opposed to the 3 fletch. So with the 3 fletch, you've got a knock feather. So that knock feather has to be a different colour than the other feathers, so you know which direction, which position your knock's going to be in for, when you go to shoot the arrow. When it comes to 2 and 4 fletches, it doesn't matter what colour the fletches are, and that's kind of the whole idea. And that idea being, you can pull your arrow out of your quiver, put it on your bow, and shoot it reliably in poor light conditions. And you can also begin to do that instinctively, and then begin to shoot instinctively. And that's kind of what my goal is to get. I used to be able to shoot instinctively, but I've got out of the habit. I haven't been shooting enough, and I've lost my instinctive shooting ability. So I want to get back into that, and I want to be able to, draw from the quiver very quickly and immediately go and actually shoot and hit something. So I'll be making a lot of arrows for instinctive shooting, and that's kind of why I'm going to either 2 or 4 feather fletching. So anyway, so with the 4, it doesn't matter what colour. They can be all the same colour, they can be all different colours. It doesn't matter, because it's just the position of the knock. So if you put that knock on the string of your bow, the feathers are set up in the right position. Anyway, so I'm just going to go around with this one. Now, see that there? Well, I don't know if you can, but that one there lifted up a little bit, and that does happen from time to time. So what I'll do when I go through and check the tops, I'll put a little bit more glue under that and hold it down and just finish it off. It's not too bad. So I turn all these around to the next position. If you remember, in the 2 fletch arrow, I just lifted the arrow out and put it back down. But with the 4 fletch, because I'm going to use all the slots, I just keep turning it round, one slot to the next slot to the next slot until all the fletches are done. Once again, turn the bottom there until it snaps into the next location. That'll be the location of the 3rd feather, 3rd fletch. Something else I guess I should have mentioned as well, when you go to okay, like I was just saying, something I may not have mentioned before I went and, because I'm repairing these shafts, and one of the things I do before I actually started, fletching them, is I'd actually check them for straightness, and I'd actually do a bit of straightening, because wooden shafts are prone to getting slight bends in them, and it's normal, and it's just something you have to keep working on as far as keeping them straight. And so you're going to check for straightness, you're going to straighten them, but also while you're straightening them, while you're actually bending, so while you're actually, you see a bend, it's actually pretty good, but you see a bend, you're going to bend it, flex it a bit, And you're going to also be feeling for cracks, because last thing you want to do is actually refletch a shaft that's got a slight crack in it, because you're just wasting your fletches, wasting your time. So check and inspect the shafts and straighten them, and then clean them up, get them ready for the fletching. Final fletch. Take these off. Right, that one there didn't quite get down all the way. Tidy that up a bit in the end. I noticed some of these fletches were kind of curled up at the tip, and they weren't. That one in particular, I don't know if you can see that real well, but it just didn't sit down right. That happens occasionally, but I'll be able to kind of push that down, put a bit of glue under it. Should fix it up satisfactorily. Okay, same thing there, same deal. Alright, so setting up for final. Turn them all again, and I'll be in. Be in position for the final fletch. Okay, just finishing this up. I've got my test wooden arrows, traditional arrows. You see that? So I've got the three vaned, a 2 vane, and a 4 vane. And I'm just going to do a bit of testing, nothing too scientific. I'm just going to see how they perform, how I like them. I'm leaning towards these 2 vane fletches because they're very simple, and basically what it comes down to is I don't have to, when I go to knock, put the knock on the bowstring, I don't have to be looking. With the 3 vane, I have to be looking for where the knocking vane is, so that I don't knock it in reverse and then have that feather right on the inside to touch too heavily against the side of the bow or against my hand or something like that as well. So but anyway, I'll test them and just see how they perform, and take it from there, and I'll probably have all my others to repair after that. I have in the past gone for these 4 vane because with the 4 vane I don't have to look for the knocking feather either, but there's just so much more feather there. I don't think I need it. Now while I was doing that, I was also repairing some other stuff and putting a lot of knocks, gluing the knocks back on, or refletching. A lot of these arrows I actually found, like that one, this one, and the fletches were damaged on it, and the knock, there was no knock. But anyway, so I found some of these and just got around to repairing them. Where I go walking the dogs near town here, there's a lot of do a lot of shooting, a lot of archery and stuff like that, and people lose their arrows, and I find them, and maybe they're good arrows, maybe they're damaged, but fix them up because they're actually worth quite a bit of money. They get spendy if you have to keep buying and replacing arrows.